Hello and welcome to Architecture, Design, and occasionally photography. Today we are going to be speaking with Alex Ilten. Alex initially trained as an architect, receiving both bachelor's and master's degree in architecture from University of Kansas. After that, he packed his bags and set off for Southeast Asia, where he designed large-scale structures. That experience led Alex to work on other projects around the globe, including the Vatican and Empire State Building. Or, stuff that he worked on and in. Obviously, these were built before Alex. Anyways, his obsession with creation has bled into the digital world too. Alex has been down more rabbit holes than Wonderland's Alice and enjoys sound design and 3D printing. Since working at VTProDesign, Alex has worked with the company to create brand activations for brands such as Netflix, Heineken, and more, which, by the way, I was just recently appreciating how I can find more content that I want to view on Netflix. So maybe Alex can talk about why that works so well. Alex Ilten, really cool to be able to talk to you today. We have the common background of being educated in architecture and ending up doing kind of different things than a traditional practice of architecture.
Yes, we do.
Walk me through your background, education, and how you ended up getting to where you're at and what you're actually doing these days.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first off, it's a pleasure. Fan of the pod, so excited to have the opportunity to do that. And yeah, I was born and raised in the Midwest in Kansas City. I think the story of my kind of career started when I was young and just getting into art and music at a young age, and having parents that kind of fostered, being able to, dive down the rabbit hole of kind of just creative endeavors. I think
if you don't mind me asking, how did they foster that, and how did you pick? I imagine you just naturally picked up on that you were interested in the creative process, as far as the part of the creative process where you're actually creating. And how did your parents pick up on that, and how did they foster it? Selfishly, because I've got two boys.
Yeah. I've got an older brother. He's a couple years older than me, and he started taking piano lessons, I think, around like kindergarten, first grade. And they saw that I was just watching closely at an even younger age. And so they let me start taking piano at a really young age. And that kind of grew into drums and percussion and things like that. And then art, I remember taking art classes from a local artist, and we were doing anything from, painting to paper mache to sculpting and things like that. Those memories are probably early elementary school. Yeah. And then that kind of just really carried through into, secondary school. And they were always really good. They were just kind of like, what do you want to learn? What do you want to try? I think getting a broad, and we'll get into this kind of with education, but trying a lot of things when you're young helps you kind of, get a broad kind of umbrella of creative inspiration. And then you're able to kind of dive into niche kind of sectors as you want,
Right.
I had a really cool opportunity in high school. We had this technical school that you could go to. So I knocked out my kind of like first 3 hours. This was in junior and senior year of high school. And then I left and went over to this technical school where people could take, kind of car fabrication. They could take, fashion design. I actually enrolled in the multimedia program there. And so, I started doing, learning animation, 3D Studio Max, like Flash animation back in the day. At just a really young age, and all the kind of Photoshop and things like that. And then also like Pro Tools and sound design and audio design. So that kind of really kind of let me focus in on pushing those at a young age. And then ultimately kind of leading me to, college after that. I wanted to go to, I always wanted to join Pixar when I was in high school, and I went and checked out a lot of kind of animation schools around the country, actually. But I fell back on architecture in-state at the University of Kansas just because I wasn't really sure if that was I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So it was my parents kind of helped me look at more of just a wider range umbrella kind of education, and that landed in architecture, which was really interesting.
That's it's interesting to hear you mention all the tools of creativity and outlets for creativity that you mentioned, and then to kind of ask yourself the question, like, what do you do with those tools? Like, what is the purpose of creativity? And that's always kind of been a thing that's sat with me. Do you have any answer for me on that?
What is the purpose of creativity? I mean, that's I would look at that as a bigger question of what's the purpose of life, right? I mean, I've always loved the creative is the child who survived, right? And so I think that just through expression of exploration, like you said, through different mediums, whether it be poetry, music, art, I think that's what it is to kind of be human, right? And kind of digest and explore our earth, why we're here, and then use these tools to kind of communicate with other humans what we're discovering.
Yeah. To me, creativity and art are different. I'm still refining the way I hold the two in my head to more deeply understand them. But yeah, I would think that creativity is the process of solving problems in an area where there's not a clear answer yet, because that's kind of the most basic statement on creativity I can come up with at this point. But art seems to be more of an expression of experience.
Yeah, I like that. And then you can also kind of look at the dichotomy of kind of creativity and engineering, right? And we'll get into this with kind of like the work that's been keeping me busy, but I'm only as good as kind of my counterpart, right? And I think that there's a really strong symbiosis with kind of, the left side and the right side of your brain, pushing creativity, and then also juxtapositioning that with, team members, because everybody is strong in one kind of area, but somebody that can actually bring that to fruition. Right. Because you can come up with crazy ideas and visions, but they're not real until you execute and build them, right?
Right. Yeah. You always need a more entrepreneurial, creative person to start a business, typically, but then they're generally not that great at running it. You need more of a managerial side. And this is a bell curve stereotype, sure. And I was just thinking about this before this conversation, that, no one really approaches someone and looks at the answer to their math problem and says, oh, what a creative answer. It's just either right or wrong. But if you've done something that makes something that you see as like, oh, but it wasn't not a preconceived, but it wasn't just a given answer, but it is an answer that in some way, either in beauty or whatever, that makes sense, then people generally have the response of, oh, that's so creative. Like you made an answer that I didn't see was possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, is beauty subjective or objective? I can go both ways on that. I could argue both sides of that kind of coin. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting. You look at kind of just architecture in general and design, and like there is a subjective kind of relationship with what you view, right? But yeah, there's some interesting kind of mathematics that go behind why you think that, right?
Yeah, no, I think you just made me realize that I think I might believe that beauty is objective, but it's something that you can only perceive subjectively.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, because I do think there is a truth outside of us, and I'm not saying like be baptized in the Holy Spirit and believe, as whoever. I'm saying that I do believe there is a truth outside of us that our experience seeks to give form to, and that to me is the expression of art and creativity that's painting a clearer picture of what is outside of us by interacting with and forming out of the abstract into the more concrete what actually is. So I think that, yeah, beauty is objective, but you can only interpret it subjectively. That's a really beautiful way to wrap that together. Thanks for that.
Yeah, Yeah, well, thank you. No, I always liked in college studying, diving down like the phenomenology rabbit hole, right, with architects like Peter Zumthor.
Hmm.
I remember having kind of I think it was a first year professor that like, really, really was like driving into us. Like you walk into a space and it's like binary, right? Like you have a guttural feeling inside yourself, like what feels good? Does it feel good? Does it feel warm, inviting? Does it feel off-putting? Yeah, and so it's interesting using that kind of subconscious in your creative thoughts, right? So when you're creating, designing things, you look at kind of modernism and kind of this strict kind of set of rules and lines and kind of principles and protocols, and what kind of postmodern did was break that, right, and kind of create these asymmetric languages and motifs. And it's just interesting seeing the progress of mankind through design and these different kind of phases we go through, and how we kind of just deal with that question that you were alluding to.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. What modernism could be viewed as extremely rigid and almost an expression of classical architecture in how rigid it can be in the perception of it. And so you go from like classical to like a Baroque style, which broke those rigid lines. Like one of the chapels I'd visited in Rome, like when I was in architecture school, the professor pointed out, this is the example of the first cornice, or I forget exactly the term used, but this is the first one that had a fluid form. This one right here, they broke that conservative mold and went all like postmodernist essentially at that point, where modernism did this really minimalist, far more cold, minimal thing. And then postmodernism comes along and says like, well, nothing's maybe true, so it's all a subjective interpretation. And I disagree with that, but I also believe in the process of breaking down what's true to convince ourselves that we believe it in a way. So there's that.
I love it. Yeah, and I mean, you could take that into kind of form over function, right? Where you're just like, there's this age-old battle of, utility, function for humans being in it, and then just beautiful shapes and volumes and things that are inspirational for the sake of that, right? Creating awe. So, as designers, I think it's nice to kind of mix the two, right? And be able to produce something that pushes the boundaries from a beautiful aesthetic, but also have really strong function for the users and for the client.
How do you understand the emotion of awe, and how does it play into the designs that you put together with experiential design? Like that sense of awe should be something that you as a designer, pulling the levers behind the curtain, if you will, should probably have a pretty good sense of. I would imagine that you're presenting that for others to be in awe of, but where they be able to see behind the curtain, they would lose that sense of awe to some degree. And because that's the thing that I go through when I take in a movie or anyone else's photography, I don't usually interact with it with a sense of awe. I interact with it as an experience of me already knowing what goes on behind the curtain and thinking about which levers they had pulled to get the effect that gave awe, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's how you create that awe is the magic of hiding the technology, right? And so kind of getting into. And the other one is kind of the non-traditional form factor and scale. So, I mean, I think that when we're hitting, really large scale architectural buildings and facades, I think that the content, hopefully, if it's you can do really powerful, impactful things with brand storytelling. But if the content is really thought-provoking and powerful, that's an easy way to kind of, create that awe. But I think that to stop people in their tracks, in New York, and stop cars moving and stop people from walking around New York when you hit the Empire State Building with a really powerful message. Obviously, that scale is something that works. That's kind of low-hanging fruit, right?
Right.
Also, kind of, spatializing, content on surfaces, really large surfaces, whether it be, different kind of facades at a city scale or more in an intimate kind of area, looking at kind of like, spherical experiences and things like that. That's another way to kind of like immediately capture people's attention, right? People put their phones down. They know that they're experiencing something that's just they've never experienced before. Mm-hmm. And then, back to like where you led that question with was like, I think, currently at VT Pro, like we dial in those, kind of awe-inspirational moments, but we really integrate that technology, whether it be, robotics, lighting design, interactive kind of touch screens and things like that. We really want to hide that form factor so that you feel that you're immersed in the world and that you're not just kind of interacting with like a vertical touch screen, right? And so I think that those are kind of traits and principles that we have at the root of our work. But yeah, I mean, you really want to capture people's attention and get them to kind of like transform out of their normal world into something that you create that they can hopefully take with them as a lasting memory.
Oh, that's really interesting. That puts it kind of outlines the things that you might understand just intrinsically with being immersed in the work that you do. And like that for me was more so seen behind the curtain of like, well, yeah, obviously if you design something on a grand scale, it's automatically going to convey awe to, a person at a smaller scale. I mean, that's true with the pyramids, that's true with the Grand Canyon, that's true with the Empire State Building. And it's not something that I've really ever embodied in my psyche, actually thinking of that like, oh, just because this thing is so much larger than me, I automatically feel awe in my first time relating to it as just a given. That's very true through experience for me, which is kind of interesting. So what innovations have allowed architecture to evolve over the last 1,000 years? This is something that the technological advances and everything else, you use all those things as a tool towards evolving architecture into a thing that does more of this. I believe it was on your guys' website as story-driven experiences through design. Like, start out with kind of the history of architecture and how you see it and how the different technological advances along the way have gotten to us to kind of current day and how you see leading technologies right now that are pushing us into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start more recent than 1,000 years probably, but like, I mean, obviously it's kind of an evolution of materials, right, and our understanding of how to work with them. I'd probably pick it up with, I think in the 90s, you started seeing some really interesting kinetic facades, right? You had the Arab Institute in Paris was one of the first ones that like opened up, as this dialing facade that opened up and lets different sunlight come through. And so I think that kind of kickstarted a lot of kind of like physical kinetic facades and roofs and things like that was really interesting. And that was right before my time of kind of getting into career practice. But I think when I came back from working in China on kind of large scale architecture, I dove into, we had some really nuanced technologies like transparent OLEDs, e-glass. We started to really utilize e-glass in facades. And so the idea that you could add, interactive capabilities through content, and through, kind of just electricity, right? And being able to control things is really exciting, right? And so you could almost look at that as like smart architecture, where it's like living and breathing and it's able to have a relationship with its context, but also have a relationship with its users. And so you can really imagine, we worked, one of the most interesting projects in Hong Kong that we were working on, we utilized this e-glass that I was talking about, which is normally used for like, it's just a binary on off, and it's used in bathrooms or something like that, right? And it kind of like, shoots a current through a glass and it makes it opaque, right? And then you can switch it back and forth. So you can pixelate that down to tiny little pixels and you can control those pixels. And so you could have, a 2000 by 2000 pixel of e-glass that becomes kind of the facade for an atrium for a museum or something like that. And like I was saying, you could have this like really interesting dialogue with architecture as this like intermediate kind of medium, where it's, tracking the sun across the sky and able to, block that out, but then also kind of open up as people walk across the lower half of it, right? And then not only is that just kind of an analog experience, you're able to, tie that software with content, right? And so you can projection map that at night and bring that to life and do just an orchestra of visuals on this really dynamic facade. And so that's one example of kind of integrating, kind of nuanced technology into, architectural systems now. The other one that I brought up was kind of this transparent OLED and transparent LCDs where you can see through. Imagine if you strip off the film, a film layer of one of the LCDs in your house, and you can actually see through it. But when you backlight it, you can actually see content, right? So I think that we're just at the precipice of starting to see a lot of these kind of just new technologies that are used for kind of one-off bespoke, like interactive and immersive experiences. But how do we take those and actually apply that into the architectural industry, into more permanent builds?
So how is that with your company, VTProDesign, that, or I don't know if it's like your company or if you're in there just as as the executive creative director, but how does that work into working with companies like Netflix?
Yeah, so I mean, like you had mentioned before, so now with VT Pro, we're a really dialed kind of production studio we do everything in house. So clients come to us. We're about 50 to 60 people right now. Our headquarters is in LA, but we got people all over the country. But it's almost like a trifecta of like creative services, creative technologists, which is like software and systems, and then production. And so clients really come to us because we can do everything in house. And we can really, the creative team, the upfront kind of discovery of what we're kind of digesting from the client is really informed by our relationship internally with, our creative technology department and our production department. So we know that we can deliver kind of on some big visions. And we don't have to outsource that to any other third party. And so we can really keep that quality control. And like I said, it's kind of the cyclical loop of like learning from technology and being able to kind of bring those learnings back up into the creative and discovery phase. Much like in architectural practice, you'd love to kind of get your engineers and your landscape and your lighting designers in as soon as possible, and so that you can carry that kind of whole package across. Netflix, Meta, Heineken. We do a lot with Ray-Ban too. And Riot recently. We're doing a lot of kind of just high profile projects where people want to create in real life experiences where they can bring the community together. Mm-hmm. And we can kind of build out a world, kind of an immersive storytelling of, a brand or, some of their IP. And we can really kind of bring that to life with different touch points and activations that are geared towards people engaging and just being really, like I said, immersed in that world or that company.
So two follow-up questions to that. One, how much do you use AI in actually developing and building this? Because that's a huge interest of mine, like what artificial intelligence, like why we even call it artificial intelligence. And then secondly, why is Netflix in the phone app, why is it so much more user-friendly for me to interact with compared to Prime and HBO? Like I look at those two and I scroll through and I'm like, nah. And I go to Netflix and I'm like, yeah, maybe. Like there's something about the immersive experience of just the homepage at Netflix that, like just last night, I was sitting there thinking about it before I started watching Stranger Things. I'm like, something about this. I want to
They
come
have a-
back to here to select my stuff much more so than HBO or Prime.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably they got some of that algorithm from TikTok, probably. But yeah, I mean, to jump into AI, man. I mean, it's kind of a really funny time right now because I was up all night last night. Finally, got my hands on GPT-3, which is kind of like this new, capability out of OpenAI. Just from a creative standpoint, I think that we're at a precipice of like just 1,000x of our ability, and coming back to like medium and tools. I think we're going to be able to we're going to see a renaissance of just kind of concept art and like creative storytelling via AI, right? I guess it would be AGI, but yeah, so this kind of GPT-3 is kind of this word-based, AI that allows you to kind of write poetry and let them it kind of construct it for you. But I don't know if you saw, maybe a couple months ago, they came out with DALL-E, which is like the ability to input words into an AI, and then it constructs, conceptual visualizations and paintings in 2D for you. But I just got, it's called Mid Journey. I just got on that wait list and got it this morning, and you're able to type in, whatever you want, times the rendering, times the artist, times the photographer, and it creates, these visualizations for you. And man, it's freaky. My head is blown. So it's an interesting time to bring that in, because I think as a creative, you don't really see what is a rippling effect of like the internet right before it came. So I think that AI will be like that, where we're only scraping the surface with our imagination of being able to utilize that as a tool in the creative industry.
So walk me through what you're talking about, that you can put in words and everything else and it creates this 2D thing for you. Is it simply pulling from inputs that it's pulling essentially from just an infinite source of inputs from the internet and creating based on that, essentially?
I'm assuming so. Yeah. I mean, I'm no artificial intelligence expert by any means, but yeah, I think that it's scraping, but it's also, I mean, it's creating, it's interesting to see it, because it pops up 4 images, and you pick which one you want to kind of like take and do more variations of. And then you can also up the fidelity, right? But I think what's kind of blown my mind the most is like, you can tell it to render it in Octane or in Unreal 5, right? So it's like, you could potentially not have to learn and model anything and just tell the AI to do it, right? And so as I've been learning Unreal and coming from 3D background, I'm like, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you're spending a week to like design, model, build out this environment, learn how to render. Back in college, you just put a render through the render farm and you'd come back in the morning and hope that it wasn't messed up, right? And so now you've got real-time rendering in Unreal, which is just incredible. And for previs, you just snapshot your screen, and that's good enough to share with the client. But now you potentially getting a taste of, the idea that you might not even have to like render, or you might not even have to model in 3D. Like, it's almost dematerializing that whole process, that whole creative process of like design to modeling to rendering, and it's allowing to wrap it up into a pipeline that's pretty incredible.
So this opens up a different can of worms for me that's really interesting for helping to understand ourselves. Like, why do we call artificial intelligence artificial? Why is it just not computer intelligence? There's something that we understand about ourselves that influences our intelligence outside of articulated thinking. We include emotion with articulate thinking to call ourselves a complete and real thing. Yet if we can have intelligence that seems to be devoid of emotion, we call that artificial. And so all of this is built essentially, on the first glance at it, it's all built to service humans. Yet we're building it without the ability to imbue emotion into it. And that's both the thing that scares us and the thing that would scare us if it were there. Like,
yeah, I get it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Westworld, so I'm a fan of kind of diving down the rabbit hole of all of this. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. A lot of kind of people that are much, more better articulate in this world, they would look at like, this future where it's beautiful because artificial intelligence will allow us to kind of automate away these jobs that are kind of mundane and allow humanity to kind of reach this kind of new renaissance where people can focus on more creative kind of endeavors and dive back into, and obviously there's kind of a whole financial thing that needs to happen there too to be able to allow that to happen. But yeah, I don't know. You'd look at it as a creative, you'd like to think that like humans have, original creative thought, but yeah, you could almost look at like everything that you come up with in your head though is really just a remix of two separate memories, right? And you're kind of like curating those, right? And so it is. It's I think it's an interesting lifelong kind of conversation to have,
Yeah. Yeah, as I think of an artificial intelligence creative engine taking some input and asking us, give me a problem that I can solve. And then the way it solves it is it takes referential points that it then, mixes together with different connecting things between them to create something. And we call that artificial intelligence. Yet the pattern, how it came to that, is pretty much the same pattern that we would use. We would take experiential first person stuff to then create a thing. And the other thing I don't know that I'd push back on you, but the thing I would say, like, is artificial intelligence a means to an end to allowing us all to be creative? At that point, what point is our creativity if we don't have problems? And if artificial intelligence is solving problems to make life better, then when we get to this better life, what problems do we still have in front of us at that point?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, technology should be deflationary, right? Like technology should allow our lives to be better. And we don't see that in the market right now, but yeah, you would hope that we can kind of harness that in the right way. And yeah, you just look at kind of like OpenAI's kind of principles and why they exist as an organization. And I think that they're hoping to kind of steer the evolution that's coming with AGI into this direction where it's utilized to help foster exactly what you said.
Yeah, I think the conversation around it all is extremely interesting because it forces the individuals involved in the conversation to consider more deeply what we actually are. And then that helps you kind of frame the issues or deal with the outside perspective's fears. You have to kind of understand yourself, understand the person who's critically approaching what you're doing, and kind of connect the two in a way that is able to be approved by those who have doubts about it, at least enough to be able to move forward. So it's a really interesting subject for me.
I love it. Yeah, I think that we could dive down this rabbit hole. Definitely. But normally it's a late night conversation around a fire pit or something like that.
Right. So what exactly, for people who aren't in the know around it, but like emerging media, spatial content, and intelligent architecture, how would you describe that to someone who just doesn't have an interaction with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, Marshall McLuhan is always kind of a go-to to read about just kind of like the philosophy, and the birthing of kind of media architecture, really, right? And that kind of came, decades ago from a philosophical standpoint. I think that what inspired me was living and working in China. I think that they were kind of ahead of the game as far as like, having media be a part of like big architectural facades and things like that. and just seeing, especially in Hong Kong and Shanghai, how LEDs were integrated into be used as storytelling at scale, like we were discussing before. And then, you obviously see these big kind of billboards in Times Square and Las Vegas, and it's really kind of for show and back to kind of catching people's attention, right? But I think that we'll inevitably continue to see media surfaces be on exteriors of buildings and also just throughout interiors, right? Used for wayfinding, used for, ambiance, used for lighting design. But they're all separate, right? So you walk into a space and the lights are nice, and then you might have some media surfaces scattered throughout. But you're starting to see with new builds that you'll have, this CMS, this content management system, almost this like maestro or soul of a building, right? That is able to evolve throughout the day, evolve with content, evolve with mood. A good project to reference is one of the first big kind of LEDs we did in San Francisco for Salesforce lobby. We created this like beautiful CGI waterfall that comes down, and it's gorgeous, and also captured this massive ultra pan of the redwoods. And so as people are coming in and out of the lobby throughout the day, that content will change based off of what time of day it is. And potentially even tied to kind of the climate and the weather outside. And so right now you're starting to see these media walls pop up in lobbies of new buildings and kind of retrofitting in old ones. And they're like a one hero wall, right? But you can start to imagine as the cost of LEDs come down and architects and designers start to design these into their spaces more and more. You'll have a series of, separate kind of media walls, but you'll have them tied together through content, right? And so, you can almost imagine you build out these kind of spherical worlds of a redwood, for example, and then you pip almost like a window or a portal in that virtual world. And that's kind of what you bake out to put out onto these screens that are kind of spatial throughout interior lobbies. Which is just really exciting. You want to do it right. You don't want to like bombard people with content, and when it's off, it's a black screen, right? So it's kind of uninviting. So I think that there's a lot of room to kind of explore how we do that and how we embed that into surfaces and materials.
Yeah, there's a lobby that I've seen either in movies or I forget where I saw it, but it's like a really intense kind of water rushing in and kind of hitting what feels like the wall that it's displayed on, and just constantly, and it's like the whole thing is like that. And there's like these two I think areas where you can go through, but the feeling of that experience of seeing that and imagining myself in that place was very it was very intense, a very powerful thing that you were going into, very chaotic and powerful, but it definitely left an emotional impression on me, and it's not something I've come close to forgetting, so that's something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's nice to bring these kind of virtual experiences out into the real world, specifically in architectural spaces. I think that we as a society and a culture, we obviously have our relationship with our phone, which obviously awesome pros and some cons. VR is kind of this like, individual experience, although you might be hanging out with people, through that. I feel like that augmented reality is interesting, where you're able to kind of bring those virtual elements. The tech isn't there exactly yet, but it will be, where you're kind of layering on those virtual elements into physical space. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I people love to live in this world, right? This is the physical real world. And so the idea that we can kind of embed that storytelling, media technology into, our beautiful architectural spaces, and be able to augment them with, storytelling and content, and even just lighting design, really subtle, beautiful lighting design, like James Turrell or something like that. it's just really exciting, and it's beautiful. It's tactile, and it's real, and you can have shared experiences with the people that you love in real life.
So what is the thought process around imbuing personality into more of our artificial intelligent, phones, or like an actual building starting to embrace more of an ability to interact with the humans that use it and present more of a personality? Because interacting with our phones, the most technologically advanced thing that I, in my lifetime, and the most life-changing thing, it's still like Siri is so personality flat, and you don't interact with it that much. It's always you're commanding things and you're prompting mostly. There doesn't seem to be any push towards designing in an interactive personality from that device or from that building. And there's such an opportunity to create like, oh, that building has a personality. Someone designed that personality, and it interacts with you like, hey, good morning, Bob. I hope you got, there's the ability to do that. Is that a thought in your sphere?
I love that idea. I mean, so at VT Pro, we do a lot of work with robots, KUKA robotic arms, kind of the robot dogs and everything. And I've always wanted to kind of push that like human relationship with them, right? They come off as stiff and rigid. And like you're saying, I think that as we can kind of embed like human emotions into, robots and to AI and to kind of content, even this Maestro content idea. I mean, I think that flaws is a beautiful thing, right? That's what makes us human. And like to almost feel like this, this relationship with, like smart architecture, or robots or AI, that idea that they have empathy or imperfections or, things like that. I always love the idea of like drugs for AI, right? In the future, where it's like, how are they going to be able to escape their head, which is perfect all the time, right? Like you'll have to almost glitch them, or things like that. I think that, that's an interesting avenue to think and go down and kind of push with kind of experimental projects. Another one that comes to mind, as you said, like kind of imagine walking through a lobby space. Now have kind of out of Germany, it's called holoplot. It's beamforming audio, and so they're able to shoot individual sounds to a particular Cartesian coordinate as you move through space, right? And so if you're moving through space, you can be followed and kind of carried through a space with certain audio, and then the person 10, 20 feet away from you can be hearing a different language, can be hearing something else, right? And so I think that that's an interesting technology to watch, as well as there's some LEDs that are, I don't exactly know how they work, but they're kind of lenticular in effect. So as you move across them, you see different content, right? And so that content is based off of your point of view as you move through physical space. And so I think that you're going to be able to do some really interesting things with a combination of those two, where dependent on who you are, and where you're moving through space, you'll have your own kind of personal audio experience, as well as your own kind of personal relationship with the content provider, or the media technology. I love the idea of being able to craft, bespoke experiences for multitude of people in one space. I think that gets really interesting. And like you said, how do we craft that per person, right? I mean, like, do you almost have something that's synced to your phone or your RFID bracelet or whatever, so that we know the music that you like and we know that you love the ocean. And so we're able to curate that content to be ocean for you, and that you get to hear your favorite, soundscape to that. I think that gets into some really interesting territory as designers.
So that, like, there's some concerns and fears that come up with me when I hear stuff like that, because I think of, I look at the degradation of community because of things like the phone that become so addictive, and because of the ability to close yourself off to the, the human reality around you by wearing headphones all the time. And so when we get into making these highly individualized experiences that are singular rather than communal, what's the danger in something like that? And furthermore, what's the fears that you have in the back of your head when expanding into these technologies? Because it would be ignorant to say that there's no possibility of things going absurdly bad, but embodied within a creative is the bravery to say it's going to go there and we have to go there anyways. We just have to figure out how to mitigate these dangers. What are the fears and dangers that you actively mitigate in your mind in doing this?
Yeah, I mean, with you saying that, I mean, I'm a huge fan of just social and collaborative experiences. So, yeah, I mean, I think that would kind of come just within, experimentation and, looking at design principles. And like you said, looking at first principles of like, okay, this is a social space. How do we actually, create this to be more of an orchestration of sounds where it actually spurs interaction with other people in the space, right? So yeah, we do that a lot with kind of our installations and activations now, where we like to really bring people together around, let's say, just a sculpture or something like that, an interactive sculpture, and it only reaches new levels once people learn that they're actually all together, kind of interacting with this piece and able to kind of orchestrate it into its fullest potential. Right. And so I think that would be kind of, maybe a lesson that we've learned, through that is like, how do you, with simple UX, right? Like, how do you get people to understand that, the bigger and broader kind of picture experience is done together. Right. So, yeah, I mean, that kind of walking you through that lobby with that individual, experience, I think, was just to paint the picture of kind of what the technology can do. Yeah. But like you said, yeah, I think that as designers, we want to bring people together in physical spaces,
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to kind of understand that this situation is one of a social situation. So we orient it towards the group, or, this is more of this type of more individualistic location situation where we orient this and design it and program it towards the individual experience, and understanding ourselves better and understanding how to utilize technology to better the human experience, the ability for wisdom and open-mindedness, and also the embrace of proper cautionary behavior and everything else as well, to get that all to come together in that seamless way is so meaningful and important at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you look at what this kind of evolution in kind of experiential retail, right? And you're looking at like, how do, the whole industry is looking at how do we get people to come back to brick and mortar stores, because now you can order anything online and get it shipped to you in less than 2 hours. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of work in that space too, where it's just like, helping brands, take their IP, take their worlds, build out these incredible kind of spaces that, yes, have kind of retail sprinkled throughout them, but really it's more of an experience that brings people together and kind of fosters that community. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and we did that with kind of doodles, where it's like, a lot of these kind of participants are separated by the internet and they've never met anybody in real life, right? And so to kind of create this like shared world where they can go and meet, and they meet people in physical reality, and they're able to kind of like be, we foster an experience with different touch points that they come together and able to kind of activate this next level of like, fidelity in this world. I think that's what we like to push with a lot of our projects. And then, pulling that, like I said, these kind of more immersive activations that we do at this level, there's a lot to learn from them. And they kind of spearhead what we can pull back into these more permanent architectural builds, like you said, that do have a little bit more weight to them, right? Because they're permanent. Right. When you build kind of a pop-up retail shop, or you do like a 3-day, experience at a music festival or something, you're able to flex a little bit more with experimentation. And then, yeah, like I said, hopefully we take those kind of lessons and we're able to kind of, input them into some bigger projects You know, so
Right. More of a World's Fair kind of example.
I love that, the expo. Yeah, exactly.
So I think you had mentioned, if I heard you correctly, you had mentioned something earlier that some of the abilities you have within technology and AI to read mood and to interact with people that way. Did I hear that right?
Oh man, I mean, no, I would love to be able to work in that space. I don't know if anything comes to mind from what I've been able to work on. Obviously, that kind of gets a little scary with like social credit score and everything in China. But yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to like, yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to be able to have your architectural spaces be tied to your internal subjective feelings, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's a little bit over my head, but I feel like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of on our horizon here in the next decade.
Right.
Obviously we have, wearables. We've got smartwatches that are collecting that data. So yeah, I mean, I get scared with that whole thing. I mean, it's kind of like there's pros and cons to it, right? It's like data collection, and having that be sent through a third party, and then affecting kind of the space you're in. But like we're saying, there's beauty to it. And then there's things that we learn and we try to kind of control as designers into the future.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a concept for doing a piece of art that responds to the mood of the gallery presence. I'm still kind of searching. Is there a technology out there that just reads facial expression to be able to discern mood to give an input back to then influencing the piece of art in a way that expresses the mood in physical form that a camera could collect along with some AI of reading a room. That would be a very interesting interactive kind of piece of art that not one individual could really control, but more so the collective feeling of a space being embodied and presented in this physical manipulatable thing, which could be really interesting.
I like that. You could probably get a grant from Burning Man and build it out there.
There we go.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I do like that. I mean, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head as far as like what can be built now and what will be kind of embedded into spaces in the future. Yeah.
Right. Did we touch on story-driven experience through design? How does that play into this whole thing? What's that? I'm someone who does not think in narrative pretty much at all, and I know this because my wife is 100% driven through story narrative, and I just don't get it, and I cannot write a story or think in story to save my life. So, story-driven experiences through design. What does that mean? Explain it to the idiot here in the room.
No, I mean, I think that, coming from architecture, obviously, not coming from kind of that world of like, creating kind of these narratives and writing, but it's been fun to kind of like dive into that. Right. And so I think it's the idea of like, you create this world, this immersive kind of in real life, this world, but instead of just you almost have a linear kind of progression through it. Right. And so being able to kind of tell a story, you can go one way where it's just kind of a free for all where people kind of go and they have these different touch points, and they kind of interact with it as they wish. But I think that it becomes really powerful when you can actually kind of create this cinematic experience, and you kind of like, you take people on a journey through a space, right? And just like a good film or a good movie, the director is able to kind of like take you up and down and into these kind of, corners of this world, right? And immerse you in different kind of storytelling narratives and techniques. And I think that you can apply that into physical space, right? Obviously, if it's just more of a linear tunnel kind of experience, it's easier to do that. But yeah, you can kind of open that up, like almost like Sleep No More in New York, to these like, more performing art, like almost hidden performing arts, like experiences where you don't know who's an actor, who's, with you in there, just like you. We have somebody that just joined our team that had worked on the Westworld at South by Southwest a couple years ago. I think that was Giant Spoon that did that. But literally just brought that whole world to life, right? And so maybe it's not just a linear progression through an experience, but it's more of these like, choose your own adventure type of things where you don't even know, who you're interacting with, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think that we like to kind of do that where we don't just kind of hand you like a designed, experience, but we set it up for production and we set it up for people to come in and actually have a really nuanced and bespoke experience in that. Yeah.
Well, that pretty much covers everything that I was really curious to hear from you. I am really looking forward to the day when we get the ability to have a discernible personality of a building reflected in how it interacts with you. I think that will raise the level of creation of what humans have been capable of, to like designing what type of personality do we want this new development to have, and it'll interact with you in this more like minimalist manner, or in this more like, maybe in the morning it's a little groggy, in the afternoon it's a little more happy, and morning, how you doing? That just seems like that could be such a cool thing. But then I know so many people who would be so scared of something like that too. That's just such an interesting possibility and an interesting thing to open your mind up to. But also, like, any change comes with this pushback from a conservative disposition to say, like, well, what the hell other can of worms are you opening up with this kind of thing, So.
Yeah, 100%. I'm on both sides. I love it one day, and the next day you'll find me up at the cabin in the mountains with off the grid. So, yep.
Writing a manifesto.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate that we could get the time to work this out and make it happen. You seem to be pretty busy, as for some reason this year, I think people are just jumping out of the stopped economy of COVID and are just hitting the ground running right now. And the busyness right now is just insane, which is great. And also something that I've had to like temper. So, I'm sure you're probably experiencing the same thing. So, thank you for taking the time. Glad we could work this out. And, it's really inspiring to see that there's very intelligent people working with very cutting edge ideas. Like I had the thought as you were talking that like this guy is actually on the cutting edge, making the future sci-fi reality become reality, which is, like we're doing that now. Like the movies and everything else that we would watch as kids are like coming into reality, and you're on that cutting edge of making that happen. So it's a treat to be able to talk to you and to be able to see the thought process and the intelligence behind it. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Trent. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex Ilten, for joining us today.
Right, ciao.
If you want other people to follow what you're doing or to read more into your what you got going on or your company, where should they find and reach out and all that with what you're doing?
Yeah, probably just VTProDesign.com is the best place to kind of see. We've got an awesome website with all the projects and videos and case studies and everything. So yeah, we'd love for everybody to take a look, and hope to see you guys at some of our builds.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alex.